You ever think about the weird stuff you used to do when you were bored as a kid? The smallest things become the best form of entertainment and inadvertently end up wasting most of your time. Whether that be from spelling words on a calculator during math class, or watching special features that you don't care about on a DVD of a movie that you never even really liked in the first place. Recently, I've been thinking back on these pastimes and the impact they had on me today, whether I realize it or not. A certain wave of nostalgia hit me when I began to look back on Windows XP, the well-loved operating system that was released in late 2001, and the entertainment that I derived from areas where entertainment may or may have not been the intended result. Does anything on the screen look familiar to you? The taskbar at the bottom or the icons on the desktop? Well, if you're one of the 1.4 billion people who use a Windows operating system, the layout should look all too familiar to you. Because newer Windows systems just use the same layout, just updating the graphics. And whether that be for better or for worse. And this may even look familiar to you because you probably use this system in some capacity. I mean, it's pretty unsurprising considering its 13-year active lifespan, receiving support all the way up until April 2014. That makes it the longest running OS from Microsoft. Now I know what you've got to be thinking. Why stop it in early 2014? Why not stop it sooner? Why not stop it later? You see, Microsoft took the resources that were going toward Windows XP, and they were able to push those into other projects they had going on at the time. And this was actually a huge payoff. If you look at the success they had on not dropping the ball on a huge upcoming title.
This Halo thing, it's gobbledygook. We're just so completely brain dead, we just throw money at the very next shiny thing that Microsoft releases. That's what it seems like.
Due to its long active lifespan alone, it's pretty easy to see that the operating system was pretty well received. It was met with some critical acclaim as well, or as CNET grudgingly defined it, worth the hype. Now, it is time to find out if the system's still worth the acclaim today, or rather more specifically, if my mindless menu scrolling was simply a waste, or if it stood the test of time. As with every Windows operating system from Windows 3.0 all the way up until Windows 8, there are a handful of pre-installed games on the system. You know what I'm talking about: Solitaire, Minesweeper, Space Pinball, all that jazz. Now, I won't be covering those in this video specifically. I think they need their own video to kind of get into the weeds of them, but I did want to give them their nod since I did waste a lot of time as a kid playing them. Now, I know just looking at this screen, your eyes have got to be drawn to that bottom left-hand corner. This bright green button simply reading Start. Start? Start what? I already feel lost. Hey, don't worry. I don't know who would be confused at this stage, but you do have a guide. Yes, my first look at entertainment from this system is a small dog who went through different animations while in a file explorer. For whatever reason, when I was at my most desperate and no other app or game piqued my interest, I would just search words into the file explorer and see what would come up. Due to the system limitations at the time, any kind of search seemed to take an eternity. However, in opposition to my chagrin with wait times, there was a good old canine pal, or rather agent, to sit there with me and help me look for my quote, cool monkey pictures. And I do specify agent because there were other options at the time, but I didn't know this. You have Rover the dog, Merlin the wizard, and Courtney, and then Earl. And I don't want to be left in a room alone with you if you're the type to pick Earl. As disappointed as I was that my attempt to look for these sacred primate pictures was fruitless, and that I just wasted 20 minutes of my time to get that said result, I had good old Rover there, smiling away, letting me know that it would all be okay, and that one day I would learn that the File Explorer is not an online search engine. Although that could be used for that as well. It's literally like one of the options like right there, but it's probably for the best that I didn't know this as a kid. As I was doing my research on Rover, I found a lot of people on these old forums expressing their disdain toward the helper, which actually surprised me. How can they disgrace Rover so easily? But after thinking about it for a second, I get it. His presence may seem childish and he does bring bad news. So it's not always a pleasant sight. Funny enough, this isn't even the first time Microsoft has messed up in this way. They have experience with people causing an uproar against some agent or some software that they've tried to develop to try to help the user. And oddly enough, Rover's origins start in such a software. That software was Microsoft Bob, which was a software developed in 1995 and then discontinued in 1996, if that tells you its popularity. The software was basically a virtual desktop, which also functioned as a sort of game and also office decorator simulator. You can have different rooms and assign different applications to each room, and then organize and decorate each room as you see fit. I actually think that this would work a whole lot better if they would have marketed it as a game, or have it targeted a little bit more toward kids, like removing the focus on all of the work-related things like spreadsheets and whatnot, because when you don't and you try to cater toward both audiences, neither are happy. And honestly, I think they would have had a lot more success if they just really focused in on that edutainment aspect. Because this is the type of application I could see easily mandatory at computer labs and schools. That is, of course, after knocking down the ludicrous $100 price tag that was on it. Anyway, tangent aside, they did not market it that way, and people did not take too kindly to it. And as you can see, Rover is the default guide here as well. And since no manual was given with the software, it was up to Rover to speak to you through these speech bubbles, and he talks A lot. And oddly enough, another side note, this software was actually the reason that Comic Sans was developed in the first place. It ended up not being able to be used in the software as, you know, it died within a year, but the creator for Comic Sans thought the font used in the software and for Rover speaking was a little too formal. So he wanted to create a font that was a little more fun. It seems like the most notorious things that people did not like that Microsoft made were all made at the same time for the same thing. Misery loves company, I guess, and this company loves this dog. So much so that they decided to be heroes and rescue this dog from this burning dumpster fire of software and utilize him again as another animated helper. Now, if you think back to animated helpers of this era, there's probably one name that comes to the forefront of your mind. Along with it, probably a lot of memes and sour feelings. That name was probably Clippy, or better known as Clippy. Yes, after the renowned success that Microsoft Bob was, someone must have thought, hey, people really like these animated helpers, let's make another one. Clippy was an animated paperclip helper, or rather, pest as most people saw him, making his debut in Microsoft Office 97. While Rover stayed in one place like a good little doggy, Clippy was a lot more intrusive, causing users to feel a lot more irritated by his presence than helped. So, in response to this, Microsoft announced that the release of Microsoft Office XP would no longer need his help, because, quote, Office XP is so easy to use. So by default in Office XP, Clippy was turned off. And it wouldn't be until Office 2007 that they actually finally removed him. And since I had the luxury of being a kid at the time, I didn't even really use the application seriously that he was a nuisance on to begin with. It should be of no surprise that a kid like me, who spent his time aimlessly searching for non-existent files with his little dog, would also find a friend in a paperclip with eyes and eyebrows. Now I said your eyes were drawn down to this bottom left-hand corner, which might be true, but it may just be muscle memory for me at this point. Going down to the start button, all programs, accessories, paint. Paint is truly one of the most influential applications that came pre-installed on the system. Here, the world is your oyster. A very pixelated oyster that's dimensions got stretched a little bit to fit on my screen, but it's here. Paint has been a part of Windows ever since Windows has been a thing, since its first iteration in 1985. It was a pack-in application that Windows actually licensed from another company, Zsoft. At the time, it was called Paintbrush, but then when Microsoft got it, they renamed it Paint, and then changed it back to Paintbrush, and then in Windows 95, changed it back to Paint. I don't know. In its infancy, the application was pretty bare bones, with each subsequent version of Windows improving its functionality and usefulness. In the Windows XP iteration of Paint, the application was now able to natively save images as JPEGs, PNG, and the like, which is a massive improvement due to the ease and compatibility of those file types.
Do I look like I know what a JPEG is?
However, at this state, and even today, the program pales in comparison to other graphic applications out there. I mean, but hey, it's free. Where else are you going to get this kind of high quality art anyway? Yes, and despite its limitations, the vast accessibility of the program inspired many young creatives out there to just make things. And I mean anything, including some of the most crude animations you've ever seen. And I do mean that in both senses of the word. But there's no way anyone would have predicted the amount of love, time, and dedication put into this utility app to make these animations. Taking one look back at animations made in the early 2000s on Newgrounds or tutorials on YouTube, you can see the usefulness that this application had, and how it, Windows Movie Maker, and Windows XP in general were so tied into meme culture at the time because of the explosion of YouTube, Newgrounds, and eBaum's world. Of course, yes, I was one of these creatives. You see, I was taught a very special animation trick by my older brother. Using Control-Z and then Control-Y, you can undo and redo actions, respectively, resulting in some pretty fluid animations. Other tricks and shortcuts were always fun to figure out as well, like holding Control plus and minus, making your paintbrush grow larger or smaller, respectively. You can see how this kind of simple, quick fun was so appealing, and it's easy to see how limitless hours were spent meticulously crafting such beauties as these. There was always something so mesmerizing about these animations. With something so crude, anything could happen next. If only we could have more. Hey, don't worry. I've got you. Well, technically, Windows has got you. The audio visualizer, as the name suggests, adds a colorful light show to your audio of choice, which adds a bit of spice to your personal mixtape or whatever song you got from Napster or LimeWire. There really is something pretty magical about losing yourself in these screens of varying shapes and colors. I always found something so special and mystifying about these mashed up pixels dancing across my screen, and oddly enough, Microsoft seems to agree. You probably didn't even know it, but the audio visualizer is still a part of the Windows OS to this day. It's just a little bit more hidden than usual, but hey, it's still here. While the effect may seem seem pretty magical, the process to get here is actually pretty simple. Essentially, for an audio visualizer to work, the visualizer program takes the waveform of the selected audio, and then the amplitude of the wavelengths of the audio file dictate the movements of the visuals that you see on the screen. It sounds simple enough, but the visuals can be pretty effective when it's paired with the right songs. This functionality actually came out on Windows just before XP's release in 2001, with the Windows Media Player version 7 releasing in June of 2000. This was a huge overhaul of the application. This came with a brand new user interface, features, and you guessed it, audio visualizations. However, when Windows XP actually launched, it launched with Windows Media Player version 8 that was specifically made for Windows XP, but was no different and it included all the previous features anyway. As mesmerizing as these screens might be a little too mesmerizing. You might slip into a trance. Your screen may fall asleep. There are a handful of screensavers that came packaged with the system from the start, and let me tell you, they are not created equally. Also, they were not created specifically for Windows XP either. Most of the well-known screensavers, specifically the 3D ones, came from previous versions of Windows anyway, namely Windows 95 and Windows 98. So I'm gonna rank them. Now, a lot of these are pretty customizable, but I'm not gonna get too deep in the weeds on every single screensaver, but I will touch on a few features that some of them have. First, you've got your standard static 2D ones. You have the Windows XP logo that pops around. Marquee shoots text across your screen. Not bad. My picture slideshow. Hey, that's technically endless, so that's kind of cool. And it's pretty self-explanatory. And then there's just blank. Next, you've got to level up from that, which are these spazzing lines that want to be 3D so badly, but just do not make the cut. Beziers is made up of more circular lines, while Mystify has more angular lines. But they do get some bonus points for being RGB. Now we go into my personal favorite, the 3D screensavers. Now, all screensavers have some level of customization to them, but the 3D ones seem to have limitless possibilities. First up, we've got 3D text. Even though it is 3D, it's nothing crazy special, but it is endlessly customizable, so that's nice. Next is Starfield. This is not within the 3D name screensavers, but I'm gonna count it. I specifically kind of like this one because it looks like I'm mining around in Bedrock or something. After that, we have 3D Flower Box, which is this multicolored cube that morphs into a 6-sided jack thing that gets a star shot out of it, then morphs into a spheroid, then back into a cube. Okay. Then we have 3D flying objects, which might be the most customizable one yet. There's a variety of objects that you can choose from to fly around the screen, but not only that, the textured flag setting allows for any texture to be added to it, which makes for some great options in this department. Although it does have to be a BMP file, so that's a little sad, but it's not a massive barrier to entry. And last, and certainly not least, we have 3D pipes, arguably the most mesmerizing of all the screensavers. There's just something so incredibly satisfying watching these snake-like patterns fill up the screen with multiple colors and then slowly fade out. Additionally, this setting also allows for any texture to be added to it, but it accepts nearly all file types, and that elevates it even higher above the rest, if that were even possible. Since I'm already here in the control panel, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my next time waster. So this entire time I've been using the default cursor, the iconic, uneven white arrow. Have you ever noticed that? Look at the arrow. Isn't that the worst? The original cursor was just a little black arrow that pointed up, so they said, hey, it needs to be a little more visible, so let's tilt it and have a white with a black outline. More visibility. Makes sense. Well, what doesn't make sense is why they made it uneven. There's no need for this. Anyway, yeah, let's spruce this up a little bit. Woo! Look at these options. I always found it so fascinating when my bland white cursor would transform into other pointers, specifically found in MMOs, such as the ones found in Toontown or in RuneScape. Look at the Mickey Mouse hand! Look, it's a sword! That's sick! Lucky for us, we do have the option for a hand, but no sword. Tragic. We've got some dinos, a banana, that's the best one, and then a barber shop pole and a piano. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the logic is behind some of these, but from what I've found, a lot of them have been around since like Windows 95, but I couldn't get any definitive release date on them. And I know, it's ridiculous. If we don't have a super detailed history of colored pixels on a 20-plus-year-old operating system, what do we have? Anyway, in addition to changing your cursor type, you could also increase the trail of your cursor as well, which was a nice trippy experience, or was a little stampede if you had the right cursor on. With this newly changed cursor of ours, let's go ahead and go to the last stop in our control panel. Now, while I've been looking at a lot of visual stimulation, I feel like I've been neglecting another one of my senses. Now, while XP does have a lot of iconic sounds, Those don't even hold a candle to my friend, Samuel.
Microsoft Sam is the default text-to-speech voice. It is accompanied by its female voice counterpart,
Microsoft Mary, with a variation to the male counterpart being
Microsoft Mike. Other voices were available for download on the Microsoft website or through Microsoft Office 2003.
For those who are around in the old YouTube and Newgrounds days, I know this voice is all too familiar.
my Rafflecopter goes swah swah swah.
It was constantly being used for a voiceover for tutorials, or more popularly, as the voice of a main character in a video series. This deadpan voice was usually accompanied by an over-the-top character that showed a stark dichotomy between the droning robotic voice and the character it was inhabiting. Namely, the character that sticks out in my mind would have to be Chief from Arby and the Chief, the Machinima series made by John Graham. A majority of the character's vocabulary is the famous leet speak, with a lot of the humor being the flatline delivery of goofy acronyms and phrases that might come from your typical toxic gamer.
I'ma order pizza. You want any? You want the meat lovers? Cause you love meat so much. Lol.
You know what's funny? Back then, I don't ever recall being that annoyed of the voice used for voiceovers, even though it was used for, like, everything. And even now, I don't find myself annoyed by the voice, even though I've heard the voice for hundreds of hours of my life. But for whatever reason, I can't take a nanosecond of the TikTok voices.
If it's real, that's literally so funny.
Now the kid is bored again. Pretty.
Okay, regardless, that wraps up some of the things that I used to do to waste time on this system. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention the things on the system that were meant to waste time, such as games or other activities. But like I said, I need a whole other video to even talk about that. A majority of the applications were card games anyway, and I remember seeing older people, like my older siblings or parents, playing these games, and I was like, that's for the oldies. But even then, when I did play them, I tried to understand them, but I didn't really know what was going on. So for a lot of these apps and games, I didn't even bother, really. I hardly gave them the time of day because I figured it's not going to be something I'm going to be able to understand or even want to understand. But for whatever reason, this... This, I understood.